What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Hi guys, before we start, just a quick note to say that today's episode is sponsored by Martian Lit, publishing a line of independent sci-fi comics, including their latest book, The Synthetics, Volume 1, by none other than our friend Julian Darius, now available on Amazon. No invasion, or your money back. Check out below in the notes for links to both their site and the book on Amazon. Right, now to the episode. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. Welcome to a new year. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are doing a brand new format. Every quarter, we're going to have specific episodes. We're going to repeat that format every quarter. And I'm kicking off with story time. You sit back, you relax, and you listen to us talk about a story from the 20th century within our sort of like genre pit. It could be horror, could be science fiction, could be anything. And today, I am joined by the fantastic Tony Farina. And Tony, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so excited. I'm an English teacher, so of course short stories are my jam. And I've loved the short stories you've done so far. I mean, I got to be on one, you and Jack did one. And so I'm excited to be back to talk about short stories. I love story time. This is great. Everybody can't see us, but we're sitting on a circle. Obviously, we've got our on a rug. We've got our milk and cookies. We're ready for story time.
That's it. Yeah, I'm ready for story time. What does it say? Sit back, relax, and I shall tell you a story. Are you comfy, cozy? Well, today we're going to be talking about a story that you sent me. You sort of hit me up on Discord about this one. I was like, "Have you read this?" And I hadn't. And this, I can't. I'm trying to frame this as much as possible. This story was written by E.M. Forrester in 1909.
That's the most important thing. You need to pause there, everybody, and think about that.
Yeah,
because it's insane.
Yeah, this story is 113 years old, 112, 113 years old. Keep that in mind. The story is called The Machine Stops. And so the story, just to give you a quick overview of the plot, it's free. The thing I should say is this is, before we sort of spoil anything, because we are going to get deep into this, there is a link to the story below. But more importantly, this is copyright free. It is out there. Go find it if the link doesn't work, whatever. But you can also hear it, can't you? There's versions of it available. I'll put a link in for
through
that
LibriVox.
Well,
absolutely. Yep.
It's called The Machine Stops. So now, right, give me 2 seconds. You've read it, right? We're going to get into it.
Now here we go. Yes.
So this story, firstly, let's give a quick overview. The story follows a woman, and then it sort of follows her son. So it follows this sort of relationship. This woman, she lives in an underground environment, in a pod, as do the entire population of the Earth. And within this pod, she is exposed to, she gets food, she gets sustenance, her bed is there. She's able to broadcast lectures. She broadcasts lectures on the Australian period in classical music, which is a wonderful little touch.
Oddly specific, but it comes back around later. It was nice setup. Yeah.
And so but what happens is, because they are living under Earth, because the Earth has been decimated, really, all the resources are gone, you cannot live on the surface. However, she's invited to go see her son, who lives on almost at the other side of the Earth. And she takes an airship, and during the travels, you get some glimpses of the Earth and her reaction to that. And when she meets her son, he actually exclaims that this is all a farce. This is a fragile environment in which they live, and they need to start making their way back to the surface. And then the story for a short time follows him and his attempts to get back to the surface. And then for the final part, it returns to her. And what we find out is that he was very right. And the machine starts to stop. So let's get into this, because that's very, very brief overview, because there's some amazing stuff in this. Firstly, where did you told me off air, but where did you come across this?
Yeah. So I'm actually one night I couldn't sleep. And so when I can't sleep after a while, I stick my headphones in, and I always have like this little MP3 player that also happens to have a radio. And so I listen to my local National Public Radio station, and overnight we play the BBC on my local station. So I'm listening to a BBC. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning my time, so 9 a.m. over there on the BBC World Service. And there was this lecture. They're called the Reith Lectures, REITH lectures. And there's this whole series. And this guy was doing a thing on AI, and AI, the future for humans, it was called. And so the story says, I'm trying to go to sleep, keep in mind. So I'm listening to this thinking there's just going to be, it'll be like BBC World Service, 9 o'clock, boop. And then they like tell me, oh, it's sport. And I'm hearing about cricket, and I don't know anything about that. So I'm going to fall asleep. But this lecture happens to be on, and I am wide awake because he's like, this E.M. Forster wrote the story called, and he starts going into it. And so I was like trying to fall asleep, but also trying to remember everything. So I didn't jump out of bed, but as soon as I got up a few hours later, I like 7 a.m. I got up, I went to the computer, I looked it up, I wrote it down, ready to go, started reading it. I wasn't even done by the time I sent you the link. I just jumped on her Discord. I'm like, oh, holy fuck, Scott. So that's how I found it. And it's frustrating because I'm an English teacher. So it is what I know of E.M. Forster is, as he writes the thick plotting British novels about stuff. He like writes about, here's the inner life of the servants. He wrote Howard's End and Remains of the Day. And, those Merchant Ivory films are based on his books. So that's what I know him as. I like that. I had no idea he had done anything like this. So I feel like I've been lied to my whole life about what E.M. Forster could do.
He has a second life. He goes out at night and writes, almost like dark sci-fi stories, fantasy stories. Yeah, it's fascinating. Like you said, you sent it to me, and again, like, I was like, okay, and again, like you said, it was 1909. You were saying to me, like, keep that in mind. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to, prepare for the kind of language it's going to be. It's a shift in mindset, and within that first page, like it just hits you. Like, it's not, there's no violence. It's not like aggressive. It's nothing. It's not like that. It's just the sort of the tone that it sets. It's so out of time that, like, this could be sort of like an Arthur C. Clarke or Asimov story. This feels like second half of the 20th century.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you can see, I mean, as you're reading it, you're like, oh, whoever wrote 12 Monkeys read this. Oh, whoever, like Scott Westerfeld, the young adult writer. I can list like probably 50 people whose books I've read or movies I've seen who clearly read this, and I had never read it. So yeah, it's amazing. And what I love about it, like you said, it starts off in second person, which is so smart. There's some omniscient narrator telling us the story, which is such a great framing device. And normally when you think third person, you're like, okay, yeah, of course there's a all-powerful narrator. No, but this is a person. Somebody has survived this story, and you know that from the first paragraph. And it's so, you forget until you get to the end because you get so caught up in the story. But it starts by saying, imagine if you will. So somebody's talking straight to you in second person, and you're like, holy shit, like you said, it's story time.
It is. Well, it's totally been told to you. The two things crop up, and I was thinking, because later on, one of the things they talk about is lectures, and all I could think of is like, this is being told in one of those lectures. It's almost like a meta story. Like this is being recited as a story to the same audience. The other thing is, obviously, on the Patreon, Julian and I do Trekking Through the Twilight Zone.
Right.
I couldn't read that first paragraph without hearing Rod Serling's voice.
100%. I know.
This is a Twilight Zone episode.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It does everything right. It does. And again, so Rod Serling read this, right?
Yeah.
We know there's 0%, he read it. You think of all like O. Henry, all of our like really good short story writers who like a good twist, who know how to set tone, who know how to create place, because that first paragraph is so specific, and it doesn't. So it gives you, like you said, right from the beginning, you're hooked, and it isn't everything you said is true. You're going to prepare yourself for this 1909 language, but it isn't that. No. It is somehow from the future linguistically as well. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, because you and I have read like the pulp stories of that sort of time, and slightly after, sort of like John Carter and Tarzan, and the Edgar Rice Burroughs, and even like Lovecraft. And so that's what I was expecting. I was expecting this sort of like ponderous sort of thing. And you get into it, and you're just like, no, this thing belts along. And as you sort of say, so it says, imagine if you can, a small room. And that's where it starts. But then it sort of goes into a hexagonal in shape, like a cell of a bee. It is lighted neither by window nor by lamp, yet it is filled with soft radiance. There are apertures or for ventilation, yet the air is fresh. There are no musical instruments, and yet at the moment of my meditation, that my meditation opens, this room is throbbing with melodious sounds. And it's just this description that, like, yeah, you can't help but like picture this in your head. It's so well done. And weird, this is the thing, it's so, and I don't know what you felt, but like one of the things I feel about this story is it opens with this sort of gentle tone. Picture if you will. It's very sort of like you say, it's very sort of like English story, Here's this one, it almost sounds wonderful. It's this little cocoon, it's this soft thing, and the music is coming through, and it's well
from
lit.
everywhere. Yeah, you don't know. The room is just glowing, and there's music, and there's fresh air, and you can't see these things. And so, you feel like, this is utopia.
Wonderful.
Because,
it's like the womb. Yeah. It's like the womb. You return to that kind of thing. And then as the story progresses, you're like, it's not, I didn't mean to this, but it's a pun. It's not a womb, it's a tomb.
It is.
And it's like the menace of this story, the shift for you, when she returns back to that thing. So she does go on this journey and she's terrified of doing it. And then the description you get later on when she is contacted by her son, and we'll get onto the technology in a bit about what she sees.
Outrageous.
But when she chooses to leave, and there's a portal opens or a door, and there's like this funnel, this tube that goes up. And it's just like, she can't see beyond it. Like, she doesn't know what's out there. Like, it's a risk. And you realize, like, oh yeah, she's got no exposure to physical other people.
Yeah, you don't know the last time, and you don't realize that at first, because it's like you don't realize that she hasn't left her room in who knows how long. And because one of my favorite things in this is, obviously whoever wrote WALL-E, the Pixar movie WALL-E. Yeah. Obviously, and I'm pretty sure the guy in the lecture brought up WALL-E a little bit because of the way that the people are described a little bit, like when they drop something, they don't bend over and pick it up. The floor lifts it up to them because they can't bend over, and they don't touch each other and all this other stuff. But when she gets the brilliant thing is, so she takes this huge journey, and she, like you said, she's stressed out, and it's very good. The description of the flight attendant and how she's used to people, and like there's all these little shorthand things. But when she finally gets to her son Kono's room, it's exactly the same. Yeah. And there's even a line, it's like she didn't even leave her own room, because everything is exactly the same. So again, that shorthand is telling you how far in the future this is, to have two places on the opposite side of the world where every room is exactly the same. And Kono also, in theory, shouldn't be leaving his room either. And it's designed that way so that, and it's talked about kind of in passing about these young boys who are taking the place of the people who die. All rooms are the same. So no matter where you end up, which side of, we can move you around, because it doesn't matter. Where you live is irrelevant, because every space is identical everywhere. We are all the same. It was just really, short story writers, and I love that you're doing short stories, they have to be so economical.
Yes.
And that's why it's crazy that this is Forrester, because Remains of the Day is not economic.
No. Yeah. It's I think like it's broken into 3 sections.
Yeah.
It's I'll have a look. That's called the airship.
The fixing, what's it called? The hold on. The mending apparatus.
Yes. And then the final section is
the homeless.
The homeless. Yeah, so that's it. So in each title is more of a descriptor of something that happens, or is something within the story. So the airship is is what she uses to travel, and then the mending apparatus, which took me a while. Like, you're reading it, and we'll get to it in a minute. This is so far in the future, because the mending apparatus is a worm.
Yeah, it's like a big snake type thing. Yeah. He calls it a giant worm, but it's like they don't say snake, because then that leads me to believe there are no snakes, or they don't want you to be afraid of anything. So they wouldn't call it a snake, because snake has a negative connotation. Worm, oh, they're harmless. So I found that really oddly specific with the language.
Yeah. And then the homeless at the end is where it gets really sort of dystopian, when you realize how messed up this world is. And we'll get into that. We're sort of circling around things, but let's start. I mean, let's go to the
Yeah.
beginning. I mean, the beginning is like you say, you find this woman, middle-aged,
Vashti.
yeah, is it Vashti, and she's in her pod, and she's a music
Scholar.
yeah, that's
Maybe.
yeah, and she listens to this Australian sort of the Australian period, and then she projects lectures out into the world, and people listen to those lectures. And then they give lectures, and so on and so forth. There's this idea of this one's. I'm not going to say there was this notion of ideas, and you get ideas by listening to other people's lectures and this sort of thing. So it's a regurgitation of information. But this whole first section, before she gets in the plane, before she's contacted by her son, as you've said, is almost there to sort of warm you up to the world. It's to give this false sense of security.
It seems pretty cool.
Mm.
There's right. FaceTime exists, and
Yes.
you know, shit is just brought to you. So the FaceTime, like her son calls her, and it's a blue disc. It's called. It's
Mhm.
like an iPad, or like we're talking. I mean, you're in England, I'm in America. We're
Yeah.
using the blue discs, and they kind of see each other's faces. And there's even the line about how, while you can see each other, you don't actually get the tone. You don't always understand the hidden meaning behind what the person's means, which
Yes.
again you lose sometimes. Like we're seeing each other right now, but even then, I don't know. You know, I mean, you could have no pants on. I have no idea. What could that mean? You know what I mean? But it's
Fishnet
beyond-
stockings from the waist down.
absolutely. But there's always, but even if I could see your fishnet stockings, there's still like the idea that technology, the commentary is that you lose a little, even as great as it is. But they like forgive that because they're like super cool. He's on the other side of the world, and they can just pop. He can just make a call, and they see each other. There's not even a phone. So it's like he invented iPads and the internet, and you know, concierge, you know, remote delivery services like we have now. Everything's delivered to your door, and the hidden like Bluetooth
voice
speakers.
activation.
Voice activation.
And
Holy
yeah.
shit. It
Yeah.
seems, and if you're reading this 1909, you are partly terrified, but
Yeah.
also totally fascinated. Like you said, he's setting it up so that he makes it sound like, isn't this awesome?
Exactly, because yeah, if you're reading this, the first part of the 20th century, like all this technology that you're reading about, like you say, it's Jules Verne, it's you know, that kind of thing, and you're going, yeah, this is amazing. Look at the stuff, like, you know, and it is when you first read, even in the 21st century, that first part of the story, you're like, oh, yeah, I've got that. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, wow, it lulls you into this idea of just like almost ticking the box of going, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. The beds come out the wall, like you said, the food just arrives. When they drop things, the floor raises it up to them. They sit in an armchair, and they she does her lectures from her armchair, and then she decides to listen to another one in response, and all this other stuff. And you're like, all right, yeah, this sounds like, you know, it sounds, the language he uses makes it sound warm and welcoming and controlled.
In a good way.
In a good way. And then it's sort of and it's the phone call. I'll call it the phone call, the communication from her son, that where things start to the wear, or the sort of, you know, the sort of stains start to appear. And one of the things I'm not entirely sure where it comes up, but she refers to him as his son, but then it's like revealed, like, yeah, he's sort of the only one that she's in contact with. And you're like, what do you mean the only one? And there's a fantastic line in this later on where they talk about children. They say, well, the act of parenting ends at the moment of birth.
Right.
Because the child is taken away at birth, raised by the machine, and then when it's old enough, it is placed in one of these pods.
Right. And that's it. And they're given, and they all have an expertise. Like, so that's why when it's set up, you think, oh, well, she's an Australian music scholar. But no, they're not, that's just because.
Yeah.
That's just what she was interested in. It turns out that she isn't raised up to do anything other than exist, because the machine, if you don't want to do anything, if you don't want to give a lecture, you could just sit and listen to lectures. If you don't want to have a thought or go on an airship, which, you know, we'll get to, you don't have to. It is a world that exists for you to exist.
Yes.
And whomever invented the machine created a world like you said, that is built womb-like to support you. You're in a womb, and then you're born, and then you're in this other womb, and that's it. You learn what the machine tells you to learn. There's only one book. It's about the machine, and
We'll get to
it's
that.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I love is that you understand that she is willing to be a lecturer, but you don't have to.
No.
So she is a scholar, but she isn't. It's also just like you said, oh, he also invented podcasts, because it's just like you started the 20th Century Geek podcast because it's something you're interested in. And so you wanted to share it with the world. You don't have a degree in 20th century geekdom, although you could if that existed. But you made yourself an expert, and then you talk about it. And that's what she did.
And there's others, like you say, like she listens. You say she listens to other lectures. Like it says, like, there's another straight after she finishes, like she stops and then moves on to listening to one, and it's about the talking about the ocean, talk about the sea. Yeah. They talk about the sea, and it's like, and even she ponders, and she's like, he says about how he's been outside. This guy's seen it. Yeah, and she's like, that's disgusting.
Yeah, not terrifying, disgusting, which is a totally different emotion. Yeah.
And that's an interesting one, because that obviously doesn't come up yet. But is that revulsion at it that you're like, oh, okay, she must be a bit weird. But then when she speaks to her son, and her son is sort of like, I think, like you say, not an expert in anything, but he has traveled. Like, he's been outside. He's gone to the surface, and he says about seeing the stars and seeing the surface world. And she is like, yeah, she keeps saying to him, like, you've got to stop talking. You've got to stop talking like this. Stop it. You're being bad, because this is what makes people homeless.
Right. And what's great is that he's so aware, because he's not an expert or anything. He's like, he's almost like a modern day conspiracy theorist, right? I mean, he's totally in this world, he's a conspiracy theorist, but because he doesn't do anything, he doesn't give lectures or anything. He's not necessarily an expert on anything, but he questions everything. And so there's this idea of like formal education as opposed to do your own research again. So lots of those idiots online who are like, I do my own research. Oh, really? Tell me how your shirt was made. Do you know how your shirt was made before you put it on? Did you make your own clothes out of something? Oh, so you didn't do your own research. That's just bullshit that you say. But in this world, the idea being that you still have to question something. So her son has, and he's aware enough. This is, again, shorthanded, that he's like, we can't talk over the machine. You have to come visit. She's like, but I can see you and I can hear you. Just tell me. And he's like, I can't, because he doesn't trust the machine.
Yeah.
And it's that whole thing about, we all know that the internet's always like, we're talking about this. Something we said, I'm sure next time we get on Google or Yahoo or whatever you go to, something we've said will show up as an ad.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure, like, Mr. E.M. Forster omnibus will pop
right.
up.
It'll pop right up. Oh, Remains of the Day. Did you want to see that movie? Emma Thompson's delightful in it. You're like, well, she is. Yeah, maybe I do. Right.
But does she fight machines? No,
she does not in that though.
But yeah, and I love this idea that, like you say, that there is this concern of being listened to, of being spied on. Skynet is listening. Like, that's another, this whole thing.
Yes.
And so he says, no, you've got to come visit me. And she decides, she agrees to, like, again, she
After
could just
a while,
say no.
Third time, he had to wear her down.
Yeah, like, it's not instant, like, because she really doesn't want to leave. And then, like I said, then the next part of the story is this travel, this period of travel she has. She goes to the station, and she realizes she's going to have to sit with people. And she's
in the open.
And it's the anxiety that she is feeling is palpable in the story. And there's a great moment when sort of they're in an airship, and the shutters are down because they don't want to see the world. She doesn't want to see the world, but she trips, and the stewardess or the attendant reaches out to grab her, and she is furious.
She loses her shit, man.
Yeah.
But she couldn't get up on her own either.
No. And which is goes back to
her muscles have atrophied.
Yeah, which
She
goes back
can't
to that
stand up.
Wally. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's that thing of like in her head, Vishanti, she sort of says, like, she doesn't know these social interactions. It's sort of like, it's so uncouth. And the stewardess is like, I'm so sorry, this is my day job. Like, she didn't want to have an actual job. She's like, sorry, I forget that you, but she thinks she's the weird one. Like the stewardess is like, sorry, I'm the weird one, I'm the exception, because I still, use human interaction.
And I use words. I use
Yeah.
real words for things because, like, she's like any good, flight attendant or any, like when you're flying, the pilot's like, look out the window. So she's like a tour guide. So she knows what the names of things are. She's like, oh, look, there's this country and there's
Yeah.
these mountains, words that nobody uses. And she's like, what are we talking about? And she's like, oh, I forget. You idiots down below
Don't
don't know
this.
anything about the world.
But there's a great thing here when this is when you start to get this like this theme of ideas, and I love that it's so anti everything. To be perfectly honest, you hear poets saying sort of like, I saw that sunrise or that sunset, or I saw the light glistening off some wet leaves, and sort of like it inspired me to write this thing. She glimpses the sun rising over a mountain
Mountains.
range.
Yeah.
She's like, this doesn't give me any ideas, and shuts it.
Oh, yeah. Well, because that's the thing. She's like, I hate being on airships because I can never think. And Kuno says, that's the only time I can think. And so then you also understand the commentary there about like who they are. Shorthand. We don't need exposition. We know completely the different kinds of brains they have, the different kinds of lives they're living. And then it's reiterated there, where she's like, I don't want to look. I don't even want it. I don't want it.
Yeah. Like anything she can do, because she says about how revolted and disturbed she is by this sort of all the potential to see, like, because when she does get to her son's apartment, she's like, I almost saw the world.
I know, and she's so mad.
Yeah, I've come here, but you made me travel. You made me see things. And then when he
seeing things means I might have to think something or feel something, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah,
she can't articulate those words.
No.
That's what she's saying to him is, I had to see things, and seeing
can't
things.
Process it.
Right, my brain is that part of my brain. It's not about Australian music. I don't know anything about it.
And I love this idea. It's like, it doesn't give me ideas, but like you're right. It's like, well, no, it just doesn't give you any ideas about what you are a specialist in. Like you can't process this additional information. And then he sort of says like, well, I want to just talk to you about this idea that like, we're very reliant on this machine. And I'm not entirely sure that's safe. What do you think? And she's like, you don't want to be talking like this.
Right, because the book of the machine tells you everything you need to know, and the book of the machine tells you everything's fine. And it's not in the book of the machine, so I don't want to talk about it. It's very clear.
Well, and we'll get to the book of the machine because that starts to come up more. But that's when it sort of starts to come up. There is every apartment or every pod comes with this book, and it tells you everything, like what each button does. It's literally a manual. That's all it is. Yeah. It's a manual, right?
Push this button, and this is what happens. Push this button for coffee. Push this button to take a shit. Push this button to do whatever. Right? Yeah,
it's literally a manual. But it's hardbound. It's hardbound. It's sort of like a proper thick book, and it says like the machine or something on the front. It's but the son's like, no, look, I'm thinking I might go to the surface, and she's like, oh, what we need a permit. He's like, well, not really. Yeah, do I? I think I found a way out. And she's like, I'm going. That's it. I'm done. Don't contact me. You're, excommunicated. Her sort of instant response. I love the fact because it says like she's traveled from England, I think, because she mentions like Sussex and.
Right. No, he's in Sussex.
Oh, he's in Sussex. Sorry. She's in. Is she in Australia?
Probably Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, because it says like traveled around the world. So you don't know how long she's been traveling for. But like you say, she's like, I'm done, and just leaves.
Yeah.
But then.
Yeah. But he tells her his story though.
Yeah.
And it's weird, and it's like so weird because she's panicked, but then the more he tells, it's also like. She couldn't experience it herself because, like you said, she flies over the earth and she's closing windows and she's panicked and I don't want to look and I don't want to be on an airship and this lady touched me and my book fell on the ground and oh my God, what am I supposed to do? And I had to breathe other people's air and it's so weird and oh my God. And then when he starts telling the story, she's totally wrapped because it's passive. To experience everything he experienced on his own would have killed her. But what I love about it is he essentially, how can I reach my mother? I'll give her a lecture. Yes. And that's what he does. And he hooks her. And it's so brilliant because he wants, I feel, he wants his mom to come because he wants to take her up But once he realizes she can't go, he's like, well, I'm going to just give her the only thing I can give her is a lecture because that's the only way to get through it. So then the middle section, the mending apparatus, he gives his lecture of the surface, and then she can't stop. And he's like, well, we're done now. Like he's like, okay, you can go. She's like, no. Now I need to know, because it was passive and it was safe. So it's really well done about this idea of secondhand living, again, in a shorthand way. The sons experienced it. She had the opportunity to experience the exact same thing he did, and she rejected it. But now that he's telling her a story about it, she's all in because it's safe.
Yes, it's like you say, it's another lecture. It's information that she's being fed. But his story is really, it's that thing of a story inside a story. Like, he's telling it. But I like this idea of like he got up and he was like, yeah, there's got to be more to this. He recognizes that there's a constant whirring behind them.
The humming, he calls it. The humming is inside of us, is what I think is how he says, or it's in our hearts or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because from the moment they're born, all they're like is there. Like it's just part of them. And it even speculates that, like, if it were to stop, it would be deafening. Like, it's such a part of them. But then his story says that he eventually went out to the station platform, and he walked back and forth on the platform. He said it was exercise. I felt out of breath and I got stronger. And then he said, well, the only place I could go was up to the next level, and I walked on their platform, but it was exactly the same. And then he starts to he's basically working his way to the surface. And then he's like, I love, there's a great moment where he's like, it's basically just a logical leap. He's like, someone had to build this place.
So good. The fact that nobody, I'm like, that tells you how far away you've gone. Like, I just every once in a while, I'll mention Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. I'm sorry. Your Majesty, Your Highness, whatever you call knights. I'll mention his name in my classes just to see. Most people have no idea who he is. Like, I teach online. You should know, like, there should be getting in. You should have to pay, bow down to Sir Tim Berners-Lee before you're allowed to enter the internet, pay him a nickel. But we don't. He gave it away for free because he's that guy. So most people, because he chose not to get the fame because that's not who he is. Well, like, he invented the internet, right? I mean, the modern internet is Tim Berners-Lee, and he gave it away. And nobody knows. And so it's crazy that, like, here we are using it, and I teach on it. And when I ask people if they know who he is, not to like be a dick about it, but I just am curious, like, the infrastructure upon which your entire education system is based is created by one dude at one point in time. Do you know who that is? No idea. So it's, and we're not that far. I mean, it's 2022. The internet's only 40 years old, maximum. When Tim Berners-Lee came up with it, it was in the 80s. So it's not like, and so he's still alive, and people don't know who he is. So of course, like, however, we don't have any sense of how long they've been under there, but it's crazy, like, for him to be like, how'd this shit get here? The machine didn't build itself.
No, and I love that. And you were totally right that, I love it when it happens in films. Like, someone will watch a film and it'll be like, they'll, an event will happen, and then it's sort of like, the sequel, they go, well, they've completely forgotten about so-and-so. And you go, that's unrealistic. And you go, not really. Yeah. Not really. In my lifetime, okay, can you name who was running Russia when the wall came down? No, of course you can't. Right, move on. Like, that was a major event. Can you tell me the exact year the Berlin Wall came down? No, of course you can't. Move on. Like, life happens in information. Unless you are, funny enough, a specialist in it, and that's what you want to give lectures about,
you're not going to know.
It's not within your purview. And this is exactly what Forster was getting to, is this idea of, like, that you just have your tunnel of life. And it's a son that's going like, well, I'm starting to ask things like, where does this come from? What happens? And he finds a tunnel. Like, he goes down the tunnel. That bit was great. Like, he's on the platform. He's like, it's dark down there. Let's go have a look.
Yeah. And again, that's very adventurous, and it's very, like you mentioned Jules Verne, and it's obviously Jules Verne, because everything Jules Verne is about, like, what if? Why don't we go do that? Like you guys, the BBC, are putting out the with David Tennant's doing a Round the World in 80 Days.
Yeah.
I can't not wait. I'm so excited. It's going to be at PBS over here. I love Jules Verne because again, right? He's always like, what if? And you know, the thing about this shit that he was right about, just like this, is kind of crazy. And then you're also wondering, is it Wag the Dog? Do people read this and that's why the internet exists, or did they predict the future? Are they from the future? You don't know. But right, I love that all it takes, and this is what he's saying, is intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
One person saying, huh, that first can change everything. And then you can't have to, and it took him a while too. It's not like Pluto's like, he had to, like you said, he had to walk. And there's a whole thing in there about math where he's like, well, it took me this long to walk, but it would have only taken me 38 seconds if I had taken a train, but it took me hours. And so he's doing math that he's never done before. He's understanding.
He's rediscovering. That's what, there's a thing in there about him sort of like recognizing his physical environment. Like he goes to the station and he talks about like the platform and the walls and the space, and he recognizes this whole thing. He's like, yeah, I've lived in this like this honeycomb thing, and I'm so used to that sort of thing where I can reach to a button in all directions, but now I'm like, I've got to walk to that other wall and I've got to do this. And it's like it's like this rediscovering of what it is to be human, almost of like, oh, actually I've got these capabilities. But this story section, I like you say, this adventure section, because this is the adventure section.
Yeah, the middle section is the adventure.
Yeah. And it sort of it made me think of like those adventure stories, let's say Jules Verne or Alan Quatermain, or those sorts of those sort of late Victorian, early 20th century adventure stories. Because when he does find this tunnel, like it don't go well.
No. It does not.
It's not.
Nor should it. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that because it's taken him months to get enough strength to walk and do this. And so now his next big adventure is to go into this tunnel. And what it also shows, if he'd done that on the first day, he would have died. He's built up his strength that we've seen, but it definitely is a bit of a shit show because he doesn't understand how wind works.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand so they're breathing this manufactured air. And again, where's it coming from? And so Forrester reminds you without saying it, you're breathing manufactured air. They call them vomitoriums, where all the exhaust goes out. So he gets kind of sucked up into the airflow, which of course, if it's pushing all the expelled air from millions of underground people all up, that's going to be really strong. There's got to be a big fan. What do you think the humming is? And so without explaining it, like you just have to visualize it. And so, right, he doesn't think what exhaust is because he doesn't know what exhaust is.
No, he just sees it as a tunnel. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it blasts him out onto the surface.
It's crazy. I would love to see it. It's like the closest thing I can imagine it to is in the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. When they float up with the fizzy lifting drink. It's like that. They're just like getting sucked up closer and closer to the top. Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine like him putting his head out and then all of a sudden just being like, whoosh, off he goes. But like you say, it's not even like gentle. Like it throws him out. Like
That's true. Yeah.
He wakes up and he's like, oh, I'm some distance away from this hole. But you get then this little mini environment on the face of the earth, like what the surface is like. Like it's interesting. Like I don't know about the physics of it. I don't know how it works, but like there's these potholes because that's where the exhaust is coming out. These vomitoriums, like there's like a bubble of atmosphere of air that he's able to breathe. But just over the rise, like, yeah, it's not so good. Like,
no. I've got two questions about this part. So one, when he's describing, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So when he's describing it to his mom, he imagines the ghosts of the men who built it are talking to him. But my question to you is, and again, I've read this 3 times in the week and a half since I sent it to you because I can't stop thinking about it. I'm like, no, that's not in his head. Somebody's actually talking to him. On this most recent read, I was like, oh, there's a system of people who live underground who are working with the above ground, and they see his curiosity. So they're whispering from behind the walls or in the Bluetooth speakers that surround them. And they're like, reach out and grab it. And he's just as like used to doing whatever the machine says to do. So he does it. There's this like hidden voice. So do you think it's his imagination hearing that? Like, or do you think there's actually somebody encouraging him to do it?
I wasn't sure because it does give him an instruction, doesn't it?
Yeah, like, reach for this particular handle.
Yeah, and it's not, so it's almost like when I first read it, because I remember I did read that paragraph, I think at least twice. Is it like a reaction? You know, like grab it, like you like human instinct, impulse, that sort of like your internal subconscious going, you fucked, grab this, you know.
That could be, yeah.
You know, or like you say, is it that there's a voice going, no, grab it. You can read it both ways.
Yeah.
And I think it throws doubt on it at the end, because it does say, well, there are people out there. There are communities.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. So he gets up to the top and he can't breathe, and they've got these rebreathers, like kind of scuba devices, but they use them when they go up. So when you leave, because there's no law, they say this repeatedly, there's no law against leaving.
Not yet.
But it's frowned upon.
Yeah.
You may become homeless. So we're not telling you can't, but your house may not, your pod may be given to some other punk ass kid when you get back. So
the central committee, is it central committee?
Central committee, yeah.
The central committee, may the mending.
They might frown on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I love though is, so he gets up and he's got this breathing apparatus, and as you say, he gets sucked up and it gets blown off his face, and he's at the top. But then he's like, the air is so much heavier up here, but he's just breathing air. Like, you know what it's like when you're on an airplane or you're somewhere. And I can't imagine what it was like for people who are on submarines. I don't know how that is for them, but I can imagine as soon as they're off the submarine, breathing must be quite different. People who go from space to come down, the way that they have to be in containment as their lungs readjust to breathing in the atmosphere. And when people who are below this, the people who cut scuba divers who come up too fast, they get the bends. Yeah. So I feel like, again, that was it. It's like he's been below surface breathing this recycled air. So he gets up there and he's just breathing regular air, and the lungs don't know how to handle it. It seems heavy. It's too much for him because it's just got regular air shit. And there's probably dust.
I was going to say, it's got other particles and all this other stuff. It's not purified. It's not been filtered. And so, that was my take. He was like, oh, the atmosphere is heavy. I was like, no, I think the atmosphere is normal, and you just
not
can't
for you.
Process it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because could you imagine? I mean, if you never, even just from your house to outside, like you live in England, so you guys probably have years or months where you don't open the windows because it's fucking cold. And then when spring comes, there's like that moment of that first day you can like open the windows and get a breeze. You're like, oh my God, my house was fine. I was breathing fine, but man, it's so much nicer.
Oh yeah, you get just
from your house.
You open the front windows and the back windows. You get the flow through. Yeah, you do it now. We open the back door and you're just like, nah, screw that's cold, and shut it again. I'll come out in April.
Right. But it's like, so imagine that. That's just your house. Imagine never leaving your house. But this is like, we don't know how far down, miles underground, and so just the pressure. And then, he's also really pale. He's obviously really pale. Yeah. I just love that. And the way that he describes it is, and I love that you started by saying it's a wound, because I think what you're describing, the way that Kuno grows, and like, he's like walking, he's like a toddler. First he's a baby, and now he's a toddler, and now he's like a teenager who's like, fuck, I'm going to jump in this hole. Because that's what a dumb teenage boy does. Even though he's 40, he's like only progressing to being like 12.
It's an adolescence, isn't it? Like,
it is.
I'm finding what my body can do, and now I'm going to really push the limits of it. But I like the fact that this is interesting. So, however, he does get close to the hole again.
He does, yeah.
And he is attacked by the mending mechanism, which is a worm or a snake, depending on how you sort of want to describe it. Now, this is what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Is that attack? Is it an attack, or is it he is miscategorized as something that needs fixing?
I think it's the second. I don't think it's an attack. I think because the worm is mindless. It doesn't, it recognizes he's different, because let's think about it. He's one of the few people other than the airship lady who walks, who has been exposed to outside air now. So he's got, like you mentioned, the particles are in his lungs, they're on his body, there's dirt on him, he's sweaty. All these things nobody else is. So to me, the mending apparatus sees him as a foreign particle that needs cleaning. So they see him, they recognize him probably as human, but it's like, well, because it wraps around his leg and it starts working its way up because it's cleaning him off, but he sees it as attack. But it's just like, we can't let you bring the funk back in.
Yeah, almost like a white blood cell. It's protecting the body.
That's it, exactly. That's perfect. Yes.
Yeah. No, it was interesting because I was like, because there was a part of my brain that was like, is the machine now trying to get him? Is he
it
now?
Could have been. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but it could have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, is he a potential disruptive element? And instead of making him homeless, well, let's just not let him back in. But he does. He makes it back, and obviously he tells his story and sort of. It's leading to more questions. Like he's saying like there's more. Like he hears the hum different, and he starts to talk. He starts to talk about. He starts to talk about the book. And referencing the book of the machine, and this is where sort of like it gets to, because in the third part, and we'll get to the third part in a minute when it really gets to it, is this idea of the homeless, and why I think it's called the homeless. But it gets to this point where he's sort of saying like, well, she carries it, doesn't she? She keeps this copy of the book, and he's like, even though there's one everywhere you go, she carries. It's like a Gideon's Bible. It always appears in a bloody high top, but she carries always there. Absolutely. And so, but he starts questioning, well, why have you got it? So it's bloody manual. Like, what is the point? And she's like, well, it's the book and the machine. It becomes like this reverent relationship she has with this book. And at one point, I think after her return home, I can't remember if it's before she leaves or after she goes back, she has a secret ritual that she carries out before she goes to bed. And it's like this thing, she's like, although no one else can see her, like she still wants to keep this a secret. She knows it's almost wrong, but she kisses the book before she goes to bed. Like, she places a very sort of reverent kiss on the cover and places it down. And this is where sort of it starts to get really dark in this third section. But it does. But right before that is he says, because she's right, she's telling him about the book and how she feels about the book, and he's like, what the fuck? And he's like, it's not like it's God, because now that he's seen the stars, he's always remember he names constellations too. Yes, but that was what I was going to say that. He basically identifies Orion's belt, and Orion, he does. It's crazy. And he says, hey, he looks like a guy with a sword. Yeah, and she's like, you're crazy. Yeah. Which is funny because it depends on where your brain is. So that means his brain is working. He's being creative, because if you see Orion's belt, you're like, whatever, it just looks like 3 stars. But he's like, no, do you see this? It's such a great description. And it's I've said this before, but one of my favorite writing teachers always said, make the familiar unfamiliar. He never says Orion's belt because that word is lost to time. But like, you knew what it was. I knew what it was immediately. Like, holy shit, that's what he's seeing. So he's seen the stars. And so by seeing the stars, he believes in God now. Yeah. And they know the term God, but it's like, that's silly. And so she's like, God, whatever, you don't believe in that. But she's kissing the Bible. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting switch there. It's an interesting point, because you said that the word God it's not fragile, because religion has been made illegal. Like, it's been removed. Like, there is no religion. You just don't need it. Yeah. Because the machine provides everything. There is no God, there is no religion, there's no disparity. There's nothing. They're all atheists for that point. But they're not atheists in the sense of like, because atheists sort of, I don't want to sort of say that they're atheists in the sense of like, actively not believing in God. It's just not part of their life. It's right. They don't. It's not a term they have. No, it's just, as you said, lost to history. And so he's reintroducing it. However, that sort of scratching away at the surface that does, all of a sudden, you realise that, well, no, religion hasn't gone away. It's just changed, which it always does. And I think there's 2 interesting things in this part, because this is the switch from the mending apparatus to the homeless. So they have this conversation. So before they make the switch, though, this conversation is happening, air quotes, in private. The whole reason Kuno needs her to come is because he doesn't want the machine to listen. Yeah. But this conversation is technically in private, but as soon as it ends, everything starts to change, right?
Oh, we're not going to allow the breathing apparatuses anymore. You're not going to get those anymore. We don't need them because there's no reason to go up there. The world's fucked. You're not going to go up. So we're not even going to allow, because if you have one of those masks, you might wander up the tunnel. But without it, now you can't go because you're afraid, even though we know as readers, you could breathe up there, but the people down below are scared. So like things start to change. And this is when, after that private conversation between seemingly two unimportant people, that's when the word religion starts to happen again.
It starts to seep back in. And
with the book.
With the book. And you hear people like doing things like they'll open the book at random to read some of the manual text and take that as guidance. There's people that continue to.
That's like the I Ching.
Yeah, exactly. And there's people, like you said, it treats the book more reverently and all this other stuff. And this is where we'll get to the end. Actually, I've got some questions around this. But that's sort of like, that to me felt like an active thing. The removal of 100% the respirators. Like at first, there's sort of like it says, there's a spread of, in essays, in the lectures, people start talking more about how, they're not needed. And then all of a sudden so it gets raised with the central committee. So then the central committee are like, yeah, you're right. Now we're going to make them illegal. We don't need them. We're going to stop distributing them. You can't get permits to go outside anymore. And that's when it gets into this idea of, well, we'll get into the idea of ideas about ideas, because they're like, well, you don't need to see the sea because this guy's giving a lecture about the sea. So just listen to his lecture to talk about that lecture. But we'll get to that in a moment.
I've got so many words.
Yeah, because then it starts to remove other things until they are literally just locked in. But then which way? We'll get to the failures, because then things start to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of gets to, funnily enough, almost like the reverse of what I wrote for the Judge Dredd book. This idea of the sort of the shifting morality line. This idea of like things shift and then you adapt to them, and you go, oh, that's the norm now, and then they shift again, and you go, okay, well, that's the norm. And you keep making excuses for things, but in reverse, like that's where the things start breaking down. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's talk about this notion of ideas.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm ready. Enraged reading it again today.
Yeah. So to put it in frame, so we've talked about the lectures. These lectures that she gives about Australia. We've heard ones about the sea. There's some other ones that get given, and the idea is that everyone gives lectures, or they don't. It's up to them. But it's all about ideas. This is what they keep referring to. This idea of like ideas is looking at other people's ideas and having ideas about their ideas. And so what the machine is doing is sort of removing your access to the original intent or the original source. And so you end up commenting on somebody else's opinions. It becomes this idea of regurgitated opinions. We'll talk about social media in a minute, but there's a fantastic, and I'll let you explain actually, but there's a fantastic example given of the French Revolution.
Okay.
I'm
ready. Okay. So the idea is essentially there's this guy who says, look, you don't need a lecture about the French Revolution anymore. And I'm not going to remember all the names, because he says, because Scott had 10 lectures ago, Scott, who studied the French Revolution, who touched the books of the French Revolution, Scott gave a lecture on the French Revolution. And then Dave listened to Scott's French Revolution lecture, and he commented on Scott's he didn't read the original text. He just read Scott's text. So then the next person, and now me, 10 in, I can just kind of give you a sense of what the French Revolution is. And as we move further and further away from it, we keep adding how the machine actually created the French Revolution. So now when you listen to the last one, it's the French Revolution through the prism of the machine. And so now history says the machine caused the French Revolution, not people. And so we're just going to keep, and he says it out loud. He's saying to the person, I'm going to punch you in the face now. And they're like, cool, and stand there and get punched in the face. He's saying to them, this version of what the French Revolution is about the machine. And that's the best. Whatever Scott said, that's nonsense. Even though Scott was the scholar and Scott touched the books that were written from firsthand experiences, the machine wasn't in those books. And because the machine is all powerful and the machine is God, we have to say the French Revolution couldn't have happened without the machine. So what we're doing is we're putting this new context on it of how maybe at the time the French Revolution, people involved didn't know the machine was there, but we now know it was all part of the machine's plan. And essentially, which this term comes up way later, I actually think it was Asimov of all people who invented it, intelligent design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's what he's just created. Intelligent design, saying even though the machine wasn't there, the machine made it happen.
Yeah.
The machine had to have the French Revolution happen so we could get to the machine. So it must have been all part of the design.
Journey.
And it is fucking outrageous how everybody will just, and I understand framing because I teach literary theory. So I love that, how like you can go, all right, I'm going to watch Buffy and I'm going to apply a queer theory lens. So I'm only going to look through it through queer theory. I'm not going to think about these other things. Everything is, even though, you know, they weren't writing it that way, I'm going to apply that to it. But you're also aware that that's what you're doing. Then you take the lens off and you can go, now I'm going to look at it through a feminist lens. Now I'm going to look at it through a Marxist lens. So you're aware that you're doing it, and then you remove the lens and say, now how does doing that factor into the original text? Or what this is saying is, no, everything is through the machine lens. Those original text doesn't matter. But people do that all the time. They tell you what something means, and religious people do it the most. They're like, well, that was God's will. You're like, which God? They're like, my God. You're like the Christian God that's been around for a few thousand years. What about the people who existed before that? Man.
Well, there was
bananas.
It is. It's again. It's the way it's written is so. I'm going to say so infuriating, but it's not the way it's written. What is written, and as you're reading it, like I get angry. You're just like,
me too.
This is lunacy.
I believe you said in the Discord you were incredibly disturbed.
Yeah, I was, because you sort of read this and it starts to sort of break down, and because you can see it happening, and then you get this example. Because the other thing I found fascinating was this idea. You say you're 10 deep.
10 is the number.
Yeah. So you're 10 deep, 10 essays, lectures deep. But then what's going to happen is, let's say, not only are you sort of like introducing the machine into the context of the lens of the first one, of the source, but that's only a part of it. Because what they're actually saying is, but I'm not going to comment on that first thing. I'm only going to comment
ever again.
Yeah, I'm never going to comment on like 8, 9, and I'm going to be 10.
And that's it. There will not be an 11 either.
Yeah. And that's
what they're saying, is they're saying we've reached the point to, once the machine has been introduced into whichever lecture it is, French Revolution or Pangea or Australian string quartets. Once the machine is entered into that, we're not going to discuss it further.
Yeah.
You're just going to hear the same lecture over and over. It'll be just like, you'll only get to hear that version of the song ever again.
Now, it's amazing this is all coming in, because what I want to sort of, we'll get to the breakdowns in a minute, but one of the things that this sort of got, started to sort of really peel away, and how sort of prescient this story felt for today. Like, firstly, you and I, like you say, we're you're in you're in America, I'm in the UK. We are talking across Zoom. This is a lecture for all intents and purposes.
Yeah,
we are spreading that into the world. I will, and then you and I, let's be clear, you heard a lecture. That inspired an idea.
I heard a lecture on American radio that originated in your country.
Yeah. So we are doing this, However, I say, luckily, we have gone back to the source material. We're not
I didn't just say listen to this lecture about it. I said I didn't go back and listen to the lecture yet, because once you said let's do the show, I'm like, okay, because I was half asleep at the time. So I'm like, now once we do it, then I'm going to go listen, because I didn't want to, again, regurgitate too much. I'm pretty sure he mentioned Wally at one point, so I'm sure that's why I brought it up. But we would have thought it anyway. Yeah. So, but now I didn't want to be too influenced by him. So I didn't, because I wanted source material. Absolutely.
When I'm reading this, I'm thinking like podcasts. I'm thinking of all the stuff that we do. But one of the things that sort of came up, especially about this lecture and this idea. The idea of the cocoon, the idea of the sort of the honeycomb environment, this little bubble, and she listens to. So Shanti, she listens to her. All she listens to is her Australian quartet music. That's her thing. Yeah. Doesn't want to give time of day to anything else. Like, it's not important to her. And so I started to think about these bubbles that we've created to ourselves, and this idea of the social media. And you say about Christianity or religion or whatever, like, you see it through the lens. However, I would say that, and I think we all do it. I would say I'm as guilty as any in this modern world. But there's a political lens as well. Like, you
100%,
can go, right, I exist. I only want to listen to Fox News. That's my thing. Or I only want to listen to MSNBC or BBC or whatever the news is that you want to listen to. Or you and I are a lot more. I think we're quite liberal and sort of left leaning.
Very much. Yeah.
Right. So we're only going to look in that. So one of the things is YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, whatever these things is, it knows your preferences because you're the one that's hearting these and liking these and watching these and reading these essays or whatever. So it's going to go, well, if you read that, you're going to like this. And all of a sudden, that lens on the world becomes forced upon you. The machine, the internet, is just saying to you, here's your lens. Here's more 100%. Things that feed into your lens.
Yeah.
And so the machine is now going, it's saying like, for example, let's take a more pressing example. The riots, which is very pressing. We are recording this on the 5th.
The day January. Before. Ugh.
So yeah. So tomorrow is the anniversary of it, and so on the 6th of January last year, 2021, there were riots in Washington DC. There was invasion of the Capitol building. Now there is a historical context for that. There is fact. There are people being prosecuted. They broke into the building. They did whatever behavior.
There's video of it.
There's literally, there was social media. People took photos that freaking idiots.
Of themselves committing felonies.
I will never be caught. Selfie. Like this thing happened, right? It happened. There is a historical physical event that happened. People into that building, right? I don't know any of them. I'm not going to name them. Doesn't matter. But within a year, within 12 months, we have had, it's a false flag event. It was the FBI. It was Antifa. It was BLM. It was the right. It was whoever. This lens got put on all these things, and everybody sits there and go, well, no, you're wrong. There's a conspiracy, especially the conspiracy nuts that will go like, no. QAnon says this and this. And they're the worst. They're the dedicated ones. But this within 12 months, we said about sort of like forgetting things, but within 12 months, this one event has become the center of a whole host of conspiracies where you could actually ask 10 different people and get 10 different answers as to not just why it happened, but what actually happened on that day.
What actually happened? Yeah, because there's members of Congress who were there, who were cowering, rightfully so. I'm not calling them cowards, but they were cowering for fear for their life, who now have come out and said, well, they were just tourists who were just taking a tour of the Capitol. Like literally, I've heard members of Congress like, you motherfucker, what kind of tour are you on? I mean, I live in Florida, so maybe that's a tour. Maybe it's the drunken riot tour. But for the most part, having been on tours in Washington, D.C., or tours at museums or tours anywhere, generally, you don't have to smash windows to get into the tour. There's a tour guide, and his name is Skip, and he's going to point at interesting things and show you where the bathrooms are and make sure you get snacks along the way. You don't have to shit on the desks during. I mean, I've never had to during a tour. Maybe different, but you're right. But you say it enough, and now as things come out, you are learning that this was the plan all along. Like Steve Bannon's plan was, just make it ugly enough and then get it on the news enough. And so that you could get your right-wing people to repeat your bullshit enough. And all you have to do is say it for a month, I think was what his calculation was. If you can get it every day for a month on the same outlet, at the end of that month, most of the people who are watching will believe it.
Yeah. And this
so
is
30 days is all he gave.
Yeah. 30 days. We're saying like 12 months. And it doesn't even take that. But this idea of this lens, this bubble, and that's what I thought about this cocoon. Like, when you're in this little fire, like, all she cares about is this Australian music. Now, there will be one that just cares about the ocean or whatever. But then you put everything through that lens. Every conversation you're going to have is going to be like, I understand what you're talking about, bananas, but let's talk about bananas from the point of view of Australian folk music.
Right.
Well, I don't see how the two relate, but she will try and do that because that's her point of view. And I often think about that when I have conversations. It is in my head that I'm like, I'm this sort of like retro geeky nerd. Like I can't be like, I actively try not to fall into that trap where I'm like, I see what you're saying. But if you think about it from this 1970s auteur approach to cinema, then you're like, you slap your wrist and go, no, it's not relevant. But it's so easy to do because
Sure.
let's call it what it is. The machine, the internet, is feeding you this thing that keeps validating
algorithm.
you.
The algorithm is the
algorithm,
machine, right? Yeah.
it keeps feeding your opinion. You're right. You are right. It's there whispering in your ear. Grab the handle. You're right. This is the thing to do.
So well said.
And so I just find it fascinating watching this. I was like, oh my God. Like I'm looking down. I'm sort of like, looking at Vishant Hill, like going, you're so wrong. But then I'm like, no, because would I be any better?
Well, this is the question then, because she doesn't pay any attention to what Kuno says. She thinks he's a nutter. He moves like 6 doors down from her, and she doesn't see him. After his big reveal, she leaves. He gets moved from England to Australia to be near his mother, to be watched better, is what your assumption. But she never sees him deliberately until the very, very end. And then, but she isn't paying any attention to anything until, and this is where it comes to you, until her Australian folk throat singing music, whatever, starts to break.
Yeah,
it doesn't sound right anymore, and so she files all the other things that have been going wrong. People are dying in the tunnel, and the air is weird, and there's the hum sounds different. All of this is happening, and she is completely doesn't care.
No,
what so-and-so's lecture on the seas is broken. I don't care. I don't listen to that. Whatever. But once her music breaks, once it's about her, she's like, file a complaint. Well, because you didn't give a fuck about anybody else. So for you, it's like if all of a sudden they're like, well, sorry, the real Ghostbusters, every copy has been burned. You can never watch it again. You'd be like, wait, no, internet, you can't take the real Ghostbusters. Because you aren't that person, but that's the idea of saying, because you'd be mad if like the Australian throat singing music was taken down. You're like, no, don't take that down. Somebody likes it. I don't like that, but somebody likes that. And so because you're a good human being who is intellectual curious. That's the point of your show and what we do, is you always want somebody on to have a conversation with. That's why you and Julian, I love you guys talking, because you don't always agree. And you're like, oh, and you're coming at it from totally different perspectives. Guy's got a PhD in French. There's things he says I don't even understand what he's saying. And then you'll say, blah, 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 like that. 1970s. And he's like, holy shit, didn't see it coming. Because he recognizes you are two human beings,
different views,
who are willing to be wrong and willing to have a conversation. And you're intellectually curious. But she's not, until you took away my thing. Oh, maybe the machine is, maybe he was right only because it affects me. But if the last thing to go is the Australian music, she would never know.
Yeah. I love the catalogue of things that go wrong, though.
Oh, my God.
Because
it's amazing.
It's this idea, again, firstly, like Brazil popped into my head, this idea of the sort of,
this is Terry Gilliam's wet dream. He read this too, right?
Oh yeah, totally. Like Brazil is this idea of sort of like the pointless bureaucracy. We're going to get to one point, but what this all centers around is the pointless bureaucracy and this thing around the central committee. Does the central committee? Because I even think there was a central committee in Brazil. I can't remember now. But
100%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is the central committee human, or is the central committee?
That's the question. That's the ending question, right? Because you have to make the decision. Because what happens at the end, it leads me to believe that it is. Yeah. And I know it's easier to say, well, no, it's got to be AI, because an AI would care about humans and just let everybody die. But I don't believe it is. I mean, you could argue the AI was created, and this isn't HAL. I personally don't think the AI is sentient. I think what happened is there's a children's book series called the City of Ember series. Have you ever read those? Yeah. Okay. So in the City of Ember series, the mayor is in charge, and the mayor does what happens because that's what he was told what to do. That's what the mayor before me did, who was my dad. Bill Murray plays him in the film version. But in the back of the mayor's closet, the original mayor left notes thinking the next mayors would be intellectual curious enough to read the notes I left you that said, at this time, do this, and at this time, do this. They set it all up because they were thinking. They were men building machines. But in that 12 generations in, they don't know, because they just fall back on antiquity. And they're like, this is how we've always done it. You're like, yeah, but we're dying. We can't do it this way. So to me, the AI isn't sentient. The machine is run by humans. And because the humans don't know how to do anything, people who have power are always willing to let people who aren't powered die.
Yeah.
So that's why I think there's humans.
Okay, good. I agree.
What are
'Cause
your
this was-
thoughts?
No, I agree. No, I was tempted by this idea of this sort of like malevolent AI,
Sure.
Skynet.
It's there
or-
if you want it.
Yeah, or the Matrix. But all I kept thinking was like, but it's not killing them off in a malicious way. It's breaking. Like the machine is
Right.
literally breaking. But I love that you mentioned one of the things. There's a couple of things there. There's a great note in this where it says about exactly what you say. Like, well, the people that fix things only could fix specific bits. They've forgotten about the whole.
Yeah.
And so when the whole thing's break, they're like, oh, I don't know that bit. That's not my.
Can't fix it.
That's not my.
Yeah.
My union. doesn't
I
cover
don't
that
I
properly.
don't do lectures about that thing.
Yes, exactly. But I also like to say that this idea of the bureaucracy, and there's a great thing as the way it escalates. Like there's a funny smell, or the
Right.
music stops, or the food
And then they
doesn't
they
taste
just
right.
get used to it.
They get used to it, and they're like, oh well, because what happens is, and this is where it sounds incredibly British, and this is what made me chuckle. They raise a complaint to the fixing thing, and they'll be like, okay, well,
Yeah,
it's in a backlog with the central committee. Okay, well, I've raised the complaint, they're aware of it. I'll just wait for them to fix it.
Yep.
And nothing happens, but because then they get used to it. And you say about her music starts to break, and after a certain amount of time, she's like, oh, actually, it might sound better this way.
Insane.
Yeah.
Her whole life. She's in her 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
All she's ever cared about is this. And she's willing to, in this short amount of time, be like, it's fine.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. What are
Yeah.
you saying? No, it's not. You can't.
And you said about the machine raising things up. There's a great, because it obviously makes a point of that at the beginning, and at the end she
Mhm.
drops something and it doesn't work, and she sort of just looks at it and she's like, "Oh, I'll leave it there." Like,
Because they just leave shit on, and because the ground quit lifting it up to it.
yeah,
Because the ground used to,
Doesn't
when
work
you
anymore.
drop things, it picked it, and then that doesn't work anymore. You're like, oh, I guess that's gonna.
but the
That's
bed's
very childish. You have
Yeah.
children. You have a
Yeah,
child.
yeah, yeah.
She's older now, but you remember the time
Oh,
when
God.
she would
Yeah,
just
yeah,
drop
yeah.
shit and walk away.
Yeah.
You're like, fucking pick that up. What are you doing?
Yeah.
You see it. You're stepping over the thing you dropped.
Yeah.
Fucking pick it up. Because when you're 3, your brain is like, I'm just gonna, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. That's my worldview. And that's how she is, even though she's 60 years old. She's like, well, somebody else will take care of
And
that.
the same, like the beds don't work. And it's like I say, that's when the beds
Right.
don't work. That's when
The
people
beds don't
start-
work.
They're like because the beds come out of the wall at night, and it's all
Yeah, very
comfortable.
Fifth Element. The
yeah,
way the apartments move around. Right.
yeah. And so there's that. I love that. They're like the beds stop working. So they're like, yeah, there's only so far. Like she starts sleeping in her chair because that's the
Right.
alternative.
Because that's all she has.
Yeah. And so there's all these little moments, but then it gets the ridiculous sort of like circular bureaucracy of it's
So good.
broken. So raise it to the mending mechanism, or the mending mechanism thing that's broken. Okay, well, who do we escalate that to? The central committee. So raise it to the central committee. Okay, well, you see, this is broken, so we're going to have to go back to the mending mechanism. Well, the mending mechanism is broken. Who do we raise that to? The central committee. And it just goes round and round until, as you say, it gets to the point of people are dying. People, because the air stops working, and they are.
And this is my favorite part. I mean, it's awful what happens, but
Mm.
here's the thing. They know how to open their doors. They've just forgotten.
Mhm.
We know that she knows how to open her door because we've seen her leave.
Yeah.
So she's aware of how to leave. Her son has told her the story about air. You don't need the breathing apparatus. He's told her everything. And she sits there and fucking dies.
Well, she opens the door, doesn't she? She actually does
Yeah.
open the door, sees it, and she's like, "Yeah, it's horrible out there." Closes it and sits there and dies.
Yeah.
And
And then
it-
she does come out at the very end. At the very end, she and Kuno touch. They touch one last time before they die and they bleed out. And then he's though, even in death, feels hopeful. But it's crazy that he didn't escape either. And so off page, he's been sent to room 101, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Shit's bad for him.
Yeah, he's. Yeah, I want to know what, like you say, because you've met him and then you don't see him again till the very end.
Yeah.
And like, there's a period of time when I'm like, what happened there? Like, I want to know his story of what was happening there. But I love the fact that, like I said, it leaves it on that note, and you're just like, oh, wow, okay. But this story is basically spent sort of like it's not very long. It's like 25 pages, 30 pages.
Yeah.
Like basically, 2/3 of it is just giving you an absolute kicking.
Oh, I know it's brutal,
But
but it's good. It's worth it. It was worth
Oh,
the
yeah.
kick. We
Um,
need this kick. I think your connection to the thing that happened tomorrow, to the insurrection, is spot on. And it's not just that, it's everything. And I understand we're busy, and I understand we have interests, and I understand unlike our good friend Julian, I'm never going to speak fluent French because I'm 48. I can't get there, right? But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to watch a movie that's in French and read the subtitles. You guys just did a Spanish movie, and you weren't like, I'm watching a movie. You're like, all right, I'm gonna. And you even said in your show, you're like, I kind of think I like that one a little bit better for a lot of reasons, and so it's like you're still curious enough. You're like, I don't speak that, but I'm still going to watch it. Like when Parasite won Best Picture, people were like, what the hell? Koreans make movies? You're like, yeah, it's fucking good. You should watch it.
Check out The Raid. It's awesome.
Check that shit out. Yeah, The Raid is right. Exactly. So I think we're those kinds of people who are curious enough and willing to get out. And I think the reason this story gives us such a kicking, uncomfortable was the word you used in our Discord. And it's supposed to make you uncomfortable because Forrester wants you to feel ugly. And then when you're done reading this, think about it, read it a few more times, and then go, I got to go do something. And it can be something small. This is a call to action story. It's like, just learn one new thing. Learn something this month. I'm going to learn about whatever. And then not become an expert, just curious. And then next month, I read this book about butterflies. And so now I'm interested in moths. And now I'm interested in bees. And it's interesting, of course, bees, because they're worker bees, they're drones, right? And that's clear right from the beginning. But like, whatever, just be curious. I mean, when you think about the best writers, they write about E.M. Forster. Look at this guy. Yeah, he wrote this story and Remains of the Day. Same guy. That means he was intellectually curious enough to ask questions and not just get stuck in, I'm the guy who writes period dramas. I mean, he didn't know it was period at the time. I'm the guy who writes dramas.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, again, like you say, one of the things I find is, like, with some of these stories, especially short stories, and there are good ones, there are bad ones, and there are sort of mediocre ones, as with everything.
Of course.
But one of the ones I find, that can be very sort of like end of the spectrum is ones where writers have done it as a writing exercise. They've gone, here's a concept, and I'm going to challenge myself. Like, it's like you say, M. Forrester doing this compared to his sort of like, dramas, and you go, okay, that's fine. But this isn't a writing exercise. This isn't him just going, I'm going to challenge myself to write a science fiction story or a horror story or whatever. Like, I'm going to do, he clearly had an intent. Like, he had, about bees, he had a bee in his bonnet about something when he was writing this. Yeah. Like, something was getting in, and I looked at like what was going on at 1909, and you'd had the first Russian Revolution, which had crushed. By this point in England, you had started to get the sort of those, it's still 5 years away, but there was discontent between the British and Europe, which obviously eventually led to sort of First World War. There's all these little bits and pieces that you're looking at and going like, this is telling me a lot. But we're applying this to a modern lens. We have literally just done it. We've applied this to a modern lens. And one of the things I said about this making me feel uncomfortable, I will stick with the modern lens before I give it historical context. But like in our country at the moment, in Britain, we have got possibly one of the most evil Home Secretaries at the moment, Priti Patel, and she's trying to push through a bill called the Policing Bill, something else. But basically, it will stop you if you are arrested during a protest that the government deems to be disruptive or against certain things that they get to deem. You can be not only arrested, but then you will be put on a register. And if you are caught doing any kind of protesting activity again in the future, you will do time in prison. Like, they are literally criminalizing protesting at the moment in this country. Now, that's completely undemocratic, and it's horrendous that this is happening. But it's been hidden under Brexit and all this other stuff. And so I was reading this and being like, this idea of sort of going like, and Brexit's another good example, or the COVID regulations and the idiots that do stuff. This thing of you go, all right, yeah, it's not good, but it's the new normal. I'm going to survive in this new normal. And if they did get this bill through and they do all this stuff, there will be a time where everyone's like, this is terrible and it's awful. And then within 6-7 months, it's like, well, it's the new normal, so let's move on. Yeah, we did. I mean, we had Trump for president. You have Boris for your prime minister. I mean, the things that, like, in my state, in Florida, because you guys don't have governors the way that we do. Like, your counties don't have, like, so my state governor, you mentioned protesting, last year, 2 years ago, got a law passed where, this is true,
So first of all, now a mob is considered 3 or more people. And if you're in a car and you feel threatened by a mob, you can hit them with your car legally to protect yourself. You just drive over them.
It's like the
So
pedestrian
what
right of
he
way.
did,
Yeah, the pedestrian right of way law in Los Angeles, which obviously,
yeah. But so what he essentially said, my governor, is that if you're driving along and you see a protest and you feel that they're doing something you don't like, you can just say, I was threatened, so I turned left. And I just plowed into them. Even though I could have just driven by, I'm in a car and they're walking. I decided I'd hit them with my car because somehow being in your locked car and there's people with signs that say Black Lives Matter, that scares you. So you can hit them with your car. Like that is a law now. And it's outrageous. But again, well, that's just the new normal. So we have to hope that that he loses in 2022 and we get a new governor and she, the woman who's running against him, unwinds all his bullshit. But if she doesn't, then it's it forever.
Yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? Like it's this thing
Crazy.
of like, but this thing of like, it's the downfall of humanity by increments.
That's by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of, and that's what's happening. And that's what the end of this story is. Is that thing of accepting the new normal because I can't be bothered because I'm too busy, or I've got other distractions, or I've got I've got to focus on my life or whatever. And then you get like, say, her son, Chrono, who's looking up and going like, no, like this is wrong. This is broken. Like I'm going to go and explore it. I'm going to do something else. I've got to read these things. I've got to find these things out. But as an individual, not enough because they've got the central committees. It's just sort of this, I don't know, this distant sort of like, bureaucracy that runs it all. That's so
the party, like
faceless.
Again, 1984, obviously Orwell read this.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly you can tell who read this, right?
Yeah.
That's why I said Room 101. I mean, Orwell read this. Is like, fuck yeah. That's why, and it might be because I think personally, 1984 is the most important, not the best book, but the most important book ever written in English to me is 1984. And I know it's a knockoff of the Russian book from like 1934 called We, which is also worth reading, which is, well, fuck your shit up if you get a chance to read We. It terrified me, like, because it was like, oh, this was also written in Russian. And the reason like Orwell had to write 1984 is because, We wasn't being published in Russian anymore. So it's kind of like he got a copy of it. He's like, I got to do a version of this. But it's 1984, a little bit even on steroids. And but the idea being, of course, there is some bureaucracy in charge and like, which level of the circle are you in? Which part of the party you're in is how well your life is. So I still think at the end of this, I think everybody dies at the end of this. I think the party, the bureaucracy, the inner circle, they all die. I think the machine collapses on itself because that's the only way bureaucracies and authoritarian regimes can end is to collapse on themselves. We want to pretend that there's going to be a revolt, but as we saw in Cuba, you were just replace one monster for another monster. You have a coup. Well, that's not the way you make change is through coups, because then that guy's like, well, I've got all the guns.
Now.
You gave me all the goods, but I'm doing the fuck I want. So what you always see is you see change through collapse. And as we Americans are staring down the collapse of the American empire, rightfully so, time's up, guys. Let's let the Canadians try or something. It'll probably be nicer, at least. But so to me, that's why I think it's humans and that they use the AI to their advantage. They didn't know how to fix the machine. And so they say the people are hiding in the ferns on the surface because that's the only plant they know. They keep saying ferns. And that's funny to me. It's like somebody had a fern in their pod or somebody had a fern lecture because they don't say tree.
No.
Yeah, they don't. That's the only plant anybody seems to know. Well, they're hiding in the ferns. Like, well, how stupid are you? Do you know how big ferns are? They're not hiding in the ferns.
They're all lying on their stomachs, just hiding. Yeah. But that's
so good.
It is. And, the final thing I would say is just to talk about the religious thing. I was reading. I'm still in the middle of it. I haven't read all of it yet. I'm listening to it.
I haven't picked it up yet. You told me about it.
Yeah, a book by a guy called by Eric Davis. It was written in 1999. It's called Technosis, and it's the idea
with a G.
With a G. So I spelled it wrong when I sent you the thing. But it's Technosis. I'm actually going to read. I'm going to pull up the title because it's so. The guy's written a couple of books that I've read. But this one's called. There you go. I am just going to get it up so I can read the title. Technosis: Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information. And this was the idea that basically, like, it's the premise of has technology influenced our our relationship with the mystical, magic and all sorts of
Yeah.
ideas? And
Obviously,
basically,
the answer is yes.
yeah, oh yeah, but like he said, like, of course it has, but it's not removed it. Like, we've never got rid of it. It's just we've adapted it. Like, apparently we're saying, like, with the introduction of writing, I can't remember who was saying, but there's certain like empires like Mesopotamia, so the ruler of Mesopotamia was a bit like, yeah, I get the point of writing, I see it, but I don't want the masses to have it because I don't want to lose our oral history. Like, that's the
Right.
way we've done things. But then obviously it did come in, this writing came in, and we were like, actually, now we can write things down and we can explore things and and it was like, more. Then you get onto things like the printing press and so on and so forth. But it was all this development of we've kept introducing things. The Bible, for example, is a technology.
100%. Yeah. That's why Christianity has made it so long.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's the center of the religion, but it's a technology. That book it's printed.
Yeah.
It can be chipped away at, sliced and diced to be used in different ways, good or bad. And then it talks about this idea of technology, and it comes on towards the end of the book. Like, remember, this is before 2000. This was released, so social media, the internet was sort of like,
just a baby,
just burgeoning. Yeah, it was just really just about to start. And in that, he's sort of saying, like, no, this is it. This is the new religion. This information
100%.
age that we are looking at this thing, we're adapting. And that's what happens in this story. 1909, 90 years before Technosis. That's what Ian Forrester is saying is, no, we just replaced it. Religion didn't go away. We just worshipped something else, like,
and we still do.
Yeah, the sun, at the dawn of age, we saw the sun and the moon and the stars and the oceans, and we gave them mystic, godlike quality. Like, we worship Ra or Mars or Apollo, whatever. They have these representations, and then that got replaced. Now the machine is God, and
yeah, the machine is God, man. It is. It absolutely is. And it's funny because I just finished a book. It's just a short little book it's like a list. It's called 100 Things We Lost to the Internet. And it's written by an Xer. She wrote it for me. She's an Xer. She's like, here's the thing, grumpy old Xers. We're just tired of everybody ignoring us. So we're going to write a book about things we're pissy about. And she acknowledges, like, I use the internet. I love the internet, but here's some cool things I wish I miss. And like writing a letter, even writing an email. Like, to think when I was in college, my undergraduate, emails were just starting and no one really used them. This was, I graduated at my undergrad in 95. And 5 years later, I'm getting trained to how to teach hybrid classes. We're half on ground and half online. And then, now it's 2022. I spent the last 8 years fully 100% teaching exclusively online. And I've been teaching online for about, like I said, 15, 16 years. I was teaching fully online classes by like 2005. 1995, never sent an email. And so of course emails aren't a thing anymore because, and people get mad at we Xers because they're just like, why do you got to fucking send an email? Just send a text. Well, because I need context. I need to explain it to you. That's why we do a show like this, because we want to have the hour-long conversation instead of just like, you should read this book. It's sweet. You could just send a tweet out, 20th century tweets, and be like, this story is sweet, no context. Nobody's going to care, but because you have the context. And so just and that's like Mike's show, The Art of Conversation. Your show is about conversation. Those things are being lost. And this is the way we don't worship the machine. We use the machine. We treat it like a tool instead of like a magic. I mean, because I know if my computer breaks, I can't fix it. If the internet goes down, I honestly don't know how the internet works, but I know how to live without it.
Yes. Oh yeah, I agree. Like, I'm sat in this, you and I are sort of sat in the room, where I am surrounded by books, I'm surrounded by, things like, but I say, if the internet was to go down, like, I would be pissed. Like, it would it's my livelihood. Yeah. But I could go, all right, well, I'll go do something else for a bit then.
Yeah. I can go teach in a classroom. I know how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. But you say about this sort of social media thing, one of the fascinating things I find is that you say about tweets. This idea that Twitter has become shortening. Like, look at TikTok. Like, you can do a 15-second video and people can make a fortune off doing that. That could become that's somewhat an influencer. I don't understand what that means. I can barely influence, people that live in the same house as me to clean the kitchen. So
100%. You've got a tween daughter. Yes. Yeah. I understand. I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am definitely not influencing anything.
No, you're not.
But yeah, but I find it fascinating, like I say, that this story, like I said, let's not forget, like, you know, this story is coming out 8 years after the death of Queen Victoria.
Crazy.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm telling you. Like, you know, this story is coming out 5 years before the start of World War One. You know, this story that we've talked about, this idea of the, you know, of the pods, of the communication devices, of this idea of lectures being broadcast to audiences, to this technology, all of this is 112 years old.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. And I mean, thing is, we could re-rack, and I know we both got to wrap it up. I know you said that, but we could re-rack tomorrow, have a totally different conversation. We could bring in Julian, we could bring in Jack, we could bring anybody, have a totally different conversation about the same book. And that's why I love that you're doing story time, because I think it's another, and the 20th Century Geek in general is great because it's a reminder. You're not saying that it's perfect. You're not saying, if it's not, you're not like Mike Myers, if it's not Scottish, it's crap. If it's not old, it's crap. What you're saying is it's not crap because it's old. You're saying you have something to learn from this. And I would make this required reading in every high school right now, immediately. I want every 14, 15-year-old to read this story immediately.
This is the thing, you and I, you know, particularly you sort of mentioned all these things that have clearly been influenced by this.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and so to me, this is like the most influential unknown story
ever. I know, it's insane. I can't believe you and I, the shit that we love, the fact that neither of us had heard of it, that's outrageous, because this is something we should have. It should have it's weird that it didn't find our way. Like, I was a library rat, you know, so it's like I read short stories. I love this kind of stuff. It's so weird that I'd never heard of this. And again, but it was because terrestrial radio, I wasn't listening through the internet. I have an actual radio I was actually listening to. And again, that's amazing though. Magic of technology let me find this old story, and it's free online. Yeah. I didn't have to go to the library to get it, of course, but yeah, it's crazy to me. So it is, you can see its fingerprints on everything. And I can't wait to really like every time I'm looking at, like, you know, Jules Verne stuff, and even in like 1930s science fiction, 1940s science fiction, like, holy shit, they read this. This movie, clearly, like I said, 12 Monkeys. Oh my God, the whole this is it.
Oh yeah. No, I literally watched 12 Monkeys. Julian and I were talking about this, and I didn't want to talk about the machines. I did mention them off air, but I'm watching that film and going like, huh.
Yeah, but he read this.
Yeah, well, but that's based on a French short film that you
right.
said. And I'm like,
that's
so
right.
I went back and watched that, and I was like, that's where I was like, huh. Like,
yeah.
And this is
amazing.
and this is what 20th Century Geek's all about, where I'm like, I start to pick away at things, and someone's like, I really like this. And I'm like, yeah, but where did that come from? Oh, it came from this. Oh, that's come from this. Like, there's always a trail. Like, everything comes from something else. And this story, like you say, is I can't believe it's not a milestone to, you know, I can't believe it doesn't get as widely read as it, you know, it should. And so yeah, we'll wrap up on there. So, but like, really seriously, there's a link below. Like, go check this story out, and if you like it, pass it on. You know, if this makes you feel uncomfortable, like, pass it on.
I'm going to start using it this summer, like, because I have to design my courses so far in advance because they open, so I couldn't drop it in right now. But and because I can give it away for free, I can start adding it as early as maybe March, but definitely June. This is going to show up. I have this class where they think about like values and the way that we live now. So this is, I think I'm going to move this to like week 1 of the senior seminar class and be like, let's think about this story and what's the lens that we're living in. So I'm going to start making my students read it. Without a doubt.
And I'd love to hear what they have to say.
I will let you know. 100%. Yeah.
But anyway, let's wrap up this. Any final thoughts on The Machine Stops?
Read it. Fucking read it. I mean, seriously, Jack, start making your kids read this, your high school kids, anybody who teaches high school. If you have high schoolers, even if you, I think anybody who's got a kid who's Gen Z, I mean, when your daughter's old enough, she obviously needs to read this. This is, and I know they're going to be like, whatever, but if you just hand it to them and don't give them the lecture, or you just say, here, read this, I think you'll dig it. Then their intellectual curiosity will be piqued. You know, I mean, that's the problem when you make something an assignment and kids are dicks about it. But I just think start getting this into the hands of as many people as you can. Because again, the internet is great, but let it be a tool. Don't you be the tool.
Yes. No, it should allow your curiosity to grow, not to focus you. Not to limit you. So yeah, no, I agree. I think this story, it set my brain off in so many directions.
Me too.
Incredible.
So good. Thanks for saying let's talk about it.
No. Well,
when
you sent it to me, like you said, and I was like, yeah, I'll read this. And I was like, no, we've got to talk about this. Like, this is mental. Like, this is like, I cannot believe I've never come across a story like, there's stories that, like, obscure little sort of, like, usually by well-known authors and stuff, but I've got enough junk in my head that this should have already been living in there.
It should have been, right? It's crazy because you're like, it's insane. But I'm so glad we read it. I'm so glad I found it. We talked about it, and this is exciting. And so I've sent it to people, so I can't wait. And I'll send them the link. It's like, hey, I sent you that story. You should read it so you can listen to us talk about it. Yeah. So thanks for this, man. This was a joy.
Fantastic. As always, it's been fantastic, Tony. Anyway, but before we go, where can people find you? Where can people listen to you?
Yes, well, I'm on the Comics in Motion Network, of which you are, like, our first cousin. And so Comics in Motion Network, make sure you subscribe to that. And I've got a show, Indie Comic Spotlight, on there, and Seasons of Greetings on there with Jack, where we go through shows. This day that this comes out is his birthday, and our fourth episode of Angel came out today. And then we're going to finish Angel, and then we're going to put out a poll. We're going to do like a mini, like either Firefly or Spaced or The Prisoner or something like that. And then next year we're going to get into Fringe. So that's going to be exciting. And then, of course, we started the Pop Gorillas on Comics in Motion, but it became too big, and we felt like we were taking over everybody's show. So Pop Gorillas is its own little feed. We occasionally show up on Comics in Motion. So all around, so you can just go to Comics in Motion, go to Pop Gorillas. I am back on Twitter. I took a Twitter break. My Twitter's back activated. I haven't done anything yet, but that's Tricycle Boombox. But mostly follow the shows, and my website is just my initials, A.R. Farina. You can read, I have a dystopian short story that I had published last year about technology addiction. So you can find a link there and read that if you'd like.
Put it in. It'll be in the links below. Send it to me.
Okay, I will, absolutely. Yep, it's called Surgeon General's Warning, and it was actually pre-pandemic. So I guess it was 2 years ago, and the argument was cell phones. The Surgeon General of the United States decided cell phones were worse than carcinogens, so they banned them from minors. And that's the story.
Still could happen. Telling you, still could happen.
Let's hope. Yeah. Anyway, so that's me.
But that's Tony. So yeah, let's say the links below to the story. There'll be links below to Tony's story and to Pop Gorillas and all this. Pop Gorillas is awesome, by the way. It's like, I love season.
We have so much fun. Yeah,
but it's such a good show. Anyway, for us, if you enjoy what we're doing, if you really enjoy it, like you're listening to this, we're in your ears. Go to your podcast catcher, leave a 5-star review or a 4-star review, but preferably 5-star review.
5 stars all the way.
Tell us why you love us. And if you really enjoy what we're doing, check out our Patreon. We do all kinds of bits and pieces on there. It's www.patreon.com/20cg media. That's 20cg media. I've got a weekly podcast there. I'm Julian Darius, the guy I do stories at time and space with. We're looking at the Twilight Zone, every episode of the Twilight Zone. I do a monthly podcast called 30-Minute Thoughts, where it's my brain for 30 minutes. And then also quarterly Creator Corner, where it's me talking to a creator of some kind, could be anything, just about what they do and why they do it. I've had some fantastic.
Those are great shows. I love listening to those too. Those are great.
They've been fantastic. I've had Kieran Gillen on. I recently had Laura Summer, who was the voice of Janine Melnitz. That was quite good fun.
That was a great show. Yeah.
And so check it out. Again, link to that below. But Tony, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
It's been a while, but we'll have you back again soon. But yeah, you're right. Story time will be again after this one. It'll be back in the next quarter. 4. You're going to get 4 story times this year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and in the next episode, it's going to be called Then and Again. That's the next episode. We take an original and its remake, a movie, and I get to talk about it. And the next one, we're going to be talking about Evil Dead. So,
are you going to do Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, or Evil Dead and Evil Dead?
Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2013.
Oh, okay. Because Evil Dead 2 is sort of technically a remake.
Yeah, it is.
I'm sure that'll come up.
That'll be part of the conversation. But Evil Dead 81 and Evil Dead 2013.
Can't wait to hear that.
No, looking forward to it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much as always, and we'll talk to you again soon.